Imagine a tall, handsome man. Has a very nice built to him, a very smooth talk, and a smooth walk to go along with it. It seems like as soon as he speaks, everyone is just captivated by his words. He dibbles and dabbles in voodoo, but he uses those skills to cover up several murders that he committed. From family members to wives, his wives' family members, he did not discriminate. And you refer to this killer as Reverend. This is the story of the Reverend Voodoo Priest Killer, Willie Maxwell. Hello you all, I'm BlaqueWitchYaya. Thank you so much for tuning into this video. Before we even start, I am getting over the flu, so if y'all hear me wheezing, sounding crackly, it's because I could barely breathe through my nose, okay? We're getting there, so if you hear a little rasp, a little Tony Braxton, I'm getting better. While doing research for this story, I realized this man sounds like the male version of Josephine Gray. I'll have that video linked down below because just like Josephine Gray, he committed several murders in order to gain money from life insurance policies. I don't know if life insurance was like a new trendy thing at the time, so everybody just wanted to kill everybody for a little bit of money. But he did the same thing. And while doing research, I realized during this time period, which is the same time period as Josephine Gray as well, 1970 to 2000 was considered the golden age for serial killers. Odd name, odd time period, but they literally named an era after people just killing people. So we are in the heart of Alabama, Coosa County. Total population around this time is about a little less than 10,000 people. And on May 31st, 1925, not too much on the Geminis, Reverend Willie Maxwell was born. Well, at this time, he's just little Willie. He is one of 9 siblings. He was born to a sharecropper and a housekeeper. And this is kind of how they made most of their money, so much so that he ended up quitting school at an early age to end up helping his father on the farm, and he later finished school. When he was 18 years old, he actually registered for the draft and he was sent to Fort Benning for basic training. He served as a sergeant in World War II and was later discharged November 1945, but then re-enlisted 20 days later, November 20th, 1945, and then he was voluntarily discharged in 1947. So as I described before, Willie Maxwell was known to be very handsome, very charming. The ladies loved Willie, had a way with his words, very captivating. So what did most men do during this time when they had this type of attention and power? Become some type of religious leader. So that's exactly what Lil Willie did. He became an ordained minister with his wife by his side, where he met her in Alexander City at one of their largest textile companies, Russell Manufacturing. So they fell in love, they got married, they moved about 10 to 13 miles outside the city. And in 1962, Willie officially became a minister at Philippi Baptist Church. According to Casey Sapp, the congregation was really impressed with how well and thorough Willie was with explaining the scripture, delivering the word, and he was known to say a prayer so strong it could make the house shake. And then by doing this, he became a renowned minister across the state of Alabama. So Reverend Maxwell wanted to perfect his craft, so he started taking seminary classes at a branch at Selma University. And then in 1970, he was actually awarded a certificate of theological studies. So with him becoming renowned across the state of Alabama, going to school to perfect his craft, getting awarded for it, that same year, 1 of 5 mysterious deaths took place. On August 3rd, around 6 p.m., Reverend as in Willie Maxwell, traveled about 50 miles to go preach at a revival in Auburn. And with her husband gone, Mary Lou, his wife, decided that she wanted to spend some time with her girls. So she went to visit her sister. She chatted with her for a bit. Then on her way home, she stopped by her neighbor Dorcas Anderson's house. So they chatted for a bit. And Mary Lou ended up explaining, oh, you know, my husband, he wanted me to make sure I keep the phone on the hook so when he calls, I can know that he's on the way home and that he's okay. She thought the request was kind of odd, but she did what she was asked. So after their conversation ended, Mary Lou went back inside, did what she had to do, waiting around for Willie to call. She knew that revivals tend to last long, so she didn't really know what time exactly he would get home. But then around 10 p.m., she gets a call from Willie explaining that he was in an accident. She goes outside. She tells her neighbor like, hey, Willie's been in an accident. I got to go get him. She left to go find her husband, but never came back. So some time has passed and now it's around 2 a.m. Reverend Maxwell decides to call the police to report his wife missing. So of course, investigators came over to Reverend Maxwell's house to see what was going on. He told them, after I left the revival, I stopped at a service station to get a soda and to call my wife, but she didn't answer. And when I got back home, she wasn't here. So instead of going out to look for her, just because he was so exhausted from all that preaching he was doing at the revival, he decided just to go ahead and go to sleep. And then about 3 hours later, he woke up and realized that his wife still wasn't there. And that's when I decided to call her sister, who was planning on visiting anyway, but she said that she hasn't seen her. And then I contacted our neighbor Dorcas, and she said that she hasn't seen her either. So the investigators made their way over next door to ask Dorcas some questions. So she explained to them the conversations that she had with Mary Lou, one about her having to keep the phone on the hook, and then the next one about her on her way to see her husband because he's been in a bad accident. And when he called me around 2 a.m., he wasn't even home yet. Also, when he did arrive home in his car, I know that he was in an accident, so I made my way over there to look at his car, but his car didn't even have a scratch on it. So that's when Dorcas knew something was wrong. Don't praise the nosy neighbor just yet. So the investigators went back over to check out Reverend's car to see that there was not a scratch on it. And they asked the Reverend, like, hey, they said that Mary Lou said that you were in an accident. She was on her way to go get you. And the Reverend's like, oh, no. Dorcas must be confused. I'm actually concerned that Mary may have been in an accident. She's the one I believe that was in an accident. So I feel like we should check on her. So as we can see, the alibis, the lies, and the times are not adding up. You know, to be exact, I feel like maybe you guys should go check on about Highway 22. Maybe she got in an accident there. So investigators are like, okay, we'll go check Highway 22. And it wasn't long before they found Mary Lou. Indeed, in some sort of accident. So they found Mary Lou's car in a ditch next to some trees, but it didn't look like it hit any of the trees. It just looked like it was perfectly parked in the ditch. The engine was running, the headlights was on, barely any damage to the car. Mary Lou was found dead on the passenger side of the car. For the car to look completely fine, Mary Lou was towed up. There was blood everywhere. Bruises all over her body, blood all over the passenger side of the car. Jawbone was chipped, nose was dislocated. She was missing part of her left ear, which was found on the back seat on the floor. In the autopsy, they found that she had defensive wounds trying to fight off whoever attacked her or whatever attacked her. She had leaves stuffed in her mouth. It seemed like someone tried to strangle her with some type of rope. And of course, she tried to fight for her life to fend them off. That's where the defensive wounds came from. But later died. And it seems that she was beaten even more to death after that. Investigators are like, this is not a car accident. This is a murder. There was even blood in the driveway of the church house. So of course the authorities are like, this is not making any sense. He somehow knew that Mary Lou would be found on Highway 22. Somehow, some way he called here, but he was supposed to be here. His time isn't adding up. They felt like they had enough evidence to convict Maxwell for the murder of Mary Lou. Dorcas, the nosy neighbor, even testified in front of a grand jury on August 15th, which led to Maxwell being charged with first-degree murder. But guess what happened, y'all? Somehow, some mysterious way, the charges were dropped. One of the reasons, and Casey Sapp said this in his book as well, the judicial system didn't really pay much attention during this time to black on black crime. They just thought, oh, a black person killed a black person, we don't care. If it was a white girl, you would probably get our time, but we don't really care. And Dorcas changed up her whole statement. Even though all of this is going on, the investigators did not want to give up. They continued to collect evidence against Maxwell in hopes that they could open up another case. So as the investigators are continuing to collect evidence so they could have another grand jury, meanwhile, back at the station, Reverend Willie Maxwell and his attorney, Tom Brackney, but we'll just call him Tom, the attorney contacted 3 life insurance companies to make sure that they knew of Mary Lou's death. Because, of course, right before Mary Lou was found dead, Willie purchased a $15,000 life insurance policy on Mary Lou for only 25 cents and never had to pay the other amount to renew it because, of course, she died before it needed to be renewed. The insurance companies, of course, refused to pay Maxwell because they were like, this death is not an accident, it's actually a murder. Then, of course, the attorney filed some complaints because they weren't issuing the money. Then in July 1971, a trial was held between the insurance company and Maxwell. So Maxwell and his attorney ended up taking 2 of the life insurance companies to court in order to get the money. They planned on doing the same thing with the 3rd one, but they ended up caving in before the case actually even began, and they issued out the payment to Maxwell of about $100,000, which back in that time is 2-3 times the amount that it's worth now. So off to the next victim or wife. In November, Reverend Willie Maxwell decided to marry his 27-year-old neighbor, Dorcas. The Dorcas that was supposed to be Mary Lou's friend, who was supposed to testify in court, but then all of a sudden the charges got dropped. I wonder who witness statement changed up. Dorcas was able to marry Reverend Willie Maxwell because her husband suddenly passed away and she became a widow. Willie Maxwell and Dorcas welcomed a son into the world, and around this time when they got married, had a son, rumors started swirling that they felt that Reverend Willie Maxwell was involved with the death of Dorcas' husband. And simultaneously, this is where the voodoo rumors start as well. The neighbors within Willie Maxwell neighborhood, they went from finding him to be this captivating person to outright fearing him, especially when he took this random trip to Mississippi where he gained voodoo knowledge from the 7 sisters. And we'll explain the 7 sisters in a separate video. I'll put a quick summary here. But this is where people really was like, okay, he's going from reverend to a secret voodoo priest. They seen him doing different actions outside of his house. And along with that, it was reported that he would hang dead chickens in trees around his property. He would use the blood of the chickens to paint his doorstep for protection. And he had different jars of blood in his house in a room where he did all of his spell work. They say for each victim that he killed, he actually collected the blood and used that for his petitions and future spells and sacrifices. So it's a lot of rumors that went on. And sometimes I don't look at the rumors as just some made up stuff, just because I feel like a lot of people don't believe in voodoo, magic, or root work. So they'll sometimes just chuck it off to, okay, they don't know what they're talking about, because voodoo or magic technically can't be factually explained or proven because it's not black and white. So sometimes people can easily like just dust it off like, well, you can't prove it, so that can't be it, where it literally sometimes can't not be proved in the physical world, so many people won't understand. Also, it's rumored that he would keep a clothespin like pierced in his ear for proof of his power. He was known to be singing different types of chants while he's working into his yard. People couldn't understand what he was saying. And he, for some odd reason, always walked around with a bulletproof vest on. So while all this is going on, February 6, 1972, another tragedy struck where suddenly Willie Maxwell's older brother, John Columbus, was found dead. Where was he found dead, you may ask? He was found dead at the intersection between where Highway 22 and Highway 9 intersects, where they meet. Now, I want to stop right here just because with the rumors of the voodoo, they didn't really go into detail exactly what he did. You know me, I want to know like, okay, how you get into voodoo? What did you study? How did you become a priest? Who did you talk to? What was that experience like? All that stuff. But we have to take on little incidents like this. So the brother was found at the highway where Highway 22 and Highway 9 meets, an intersection, a crossroad. And some of you guys may be familiar that many sacrifices are left at crossroads for different spirits, mainly Eshu, Ilegba. If they don't have an altar nearby or they want to put it outside, they'll put it at a crossroad for that certain spirit. Most of the time it's Eshu, Ilegba, but depending on whatever spirit that they communicate with or they're giving that offering to. So immediately when I found out that it was at an intersection, I'm like, okay, so you was giving that as a sacrifice to someone. I'm assuming it's to keep your reverend power to become a renowned preacher, but that is not a coincidence that that body of the older brother taking on a warrior, a conqueror aspect was found at the intersection. So not only were investigators confused as to how did John Columbus get to this intersection, but how did he die? He wasn't hit by a car. He didn't look scuffled up, wasn't any bruises, any visible injuries. A toxicology test was done and the results showed that John Columbus had a blood alcohol level of 0.41. So investigators are like, no one with common sense would consume that much alcohol. He had to be forced to intake that much alcohol. So this is just another death that is surrounded by Willie Maxwell. And of course, randomly, Willie Maxwell just so happened to have a life insurance policy placed on his older brother just because he cares so much. So of course he made sure he notified the life insurance, where he struck big again due to the death of his brother. So now that incident just happened in February 1972. So we're just going to scoot on down the calendar to September 1972, where there was another sudden death surrounding Willie Maxwell. Motorists that were traveling down Highway 9 found a random car that was straight off the road about 30 feet with the headlights still on. So they assumed that the person probably had a medical emergency, veered off the road. So they contacted authorities to let them know. So while authorities were on their way, the motorists decided to take a look inside the car to see if they could help. This is where they found a woman laid across the front seat of the car. So when authorities arrived, they were immediately able to recognize this woman, 29-year-old Dorcas Anderson. Right after killing his brother, this man killed his wife, 29 years old. So investigators were thinking Reverend Maxwell was able to get away with the first murder of his wife. We are not going to let him get away with the second. So the investigators made sure they picked out every little detail, was descriptive, looked for every little incriminating factor that they could. And they went to talk to Reverend Maxwell to see what he got to say for himself this time. And Reverend explained, well, she put the children to bed around 9. And then she told me how her mother went fishing early in the day. So she was going over to Alexander City to pick up some of the fish. She shouldn't be long. She'll be right back. She just wanted to get some of the fish. Y'all, which is the countryest alibi I have ever heard, but I get it. Because it's like, oh, you went fishing today? Oh, what kind you got? Bass, brown, mullet? Oh, I'm going to go come pick up some. Put it in a little bag for me. So, anywho. And then on her way back, she got very close to arriving back home. But within about 250 yards away from her home, she veered off the left side of the road. And of course, investigators are like, all right, okay, we're going to wait for the autopsy. But the autopsy didn't really help anything at all. They were like, this lady's perfectly healthy. We don't see any scars. There's some leaves in her sandals. No heart problems, no brain problems. It wasn't a medical emergency. We don't see anything wrong with her or what could have caused her death. The toxicology report showed that there was nothing in her system. It was some fracturing in her throat area that could be a sign of strangulation, but it wasn't damaged enough to be for sure someone strangled her. It was like, well, this is the same damage that could have been caused if she was jerking off the road. Maybe she had whiplash. So of course the investigators are like, can you keep looking? It has to be something, anything that seems off. But like I said before, she was 29. She was perfectly healthy. So they just wrote it off to asthmatic bronchitis, even though she did not even suffer from asthma. They just think maybe she went into shock, had an asthma attack, panicked. So of course we can guess what Willie Maxwell did next. He notified all 4 of Dorcas's life insurance policy. Of course, they refused to pay him as well because they considered this not to be an accident. They caught on to the trend as well when it comes to Willie Maxwell. They even found that some of the signatures were forged. Then eventually on June 1973, all 4 of the insurance companies agreed to pay 40% of each policy, totaling in $32,000, which is equivalent to $215,000 today. And then in 1974, Willie Maxwell married his 3rd wife, Ophelia. So it's rumored that Ophelia was actually the side piece to Maxwell when he was with Mary Lou, and she was actually about to be charged. Well, she was charged with Mary Lou's murder as well, but the charges ended up being dropped because Maxwell was acquitted. Y'all, February 14th, 1976, yet another death in the Maxwell family. This time, it was Reverend Maxwell's 22-year-old nephew. The nephew name was James, who was reported missing by the family. James is the son of Willie's older sister, and there was a point in time where James even worked for his uncle Willie. James was found dead in a 1968 Pontiac, guess where? Right off of Highway 9. The car had been covered by bushes, and inside was lifeless James sitting straight up. And of course, in the autopsy, they couldn't find anything. Even when investigators came to the site, of course, they're thinking of Rev as the suspect, but there were no scratches on it, no bruises on it. The car barely had any scratches on it. So they knew it wasn't an accident. The car literally looked like it was just parked and then covered with bushes. But in the autopsy, they could not find anything that could have led to his death, so they just chucked it up to natural causes. But in the backseat of the car where they found James was a life insurance policy that was purchased by Willie Maxwell, but he made his sister, James' mom, the beneficiary. But when they looked closely at the paperwork, they realized that it was Willie Mays. Not Willie Mays. Why I want to call this man Willie May? But once they looked closely at the policy, the paperwork, the handwriting, The handwriting wasn't James. It was Willie's. So y'all, this is how bold Willie is. So of course, James is no longer with us. The life insurance policy has to be issued out to the mother because she's a beneficiary. So Willie asks his sister, oh, can you give me power of attorney? Just flat out, like, just make me have power of attorney. I'll give you a little something so I can have the money. Just no cares in the world. So, but the sister, of course, refused. But that didn't stop him because just 4 months later, another relative was found dead. Y'all, I was like, at least Josephine Gray waited some years. This man is just back to back to back. So the next victim is Shirley Ellington. She is a relative to Ophelia, and even as a young girl went to live with Ophelia. And remember, Ophelia is Willie Maxwell's third wife, his current wife at the moment. So Ophelia began taking care of Shell and ended up adopting her. Her adoptive mother, named just so happened to be Josephine, lives in Alexander City. And when Willie and Ophelia got married, Shell was actually living with them. So Shell overall was a very good kid. She was known to be a popular sophomore, known to volunteer, do different events, play sports. She was 16 years old. She even started a job working in fast food. The job was so close to her sister's house that for the first week of work, while she was getting used to working, she stayed with her sister. Then once she got used to it, one day after going home from work, she up and decided to take Ophelia's car out for a drive. Maxwell came home, realized that Ophelia's car wasn't there, Shell wasn't there. So Maxwell assumed that Shell just went out with some friends. She had plans later on that evening. She just went home to freshen up, then go back out. Maxwell went to Shell's sister to see if she's seen her. She hasn't seen her as well. Then around midnight, they decided to go to the police department to see did anybody find a missing 1974 Torino, to see did anybody see the car somewhere. Can they just put it on their file to start looking out for this car? Willie Maxwell told the officers that she didn't even have her driver's license yet. She was still learning how to drive. And the officers made them aware that someone did in fact report a Torino that was just off somewhere. It was about 7 miles west of Alexander City. It was found around 11:45 p.m. So the officers suggested for all three of them to head to the location to see if they could make an identification. But when they arrived on site, the officers wanted the Rev to stay back and for Ophelia to make the identification along with Shell's sister. And for the reason that was given, the officer said, well, it doesn't really concern you. We'll just let the immediate family kind of make the identification. So, of course, Willie Maxwell is pissed because he wants to see his own crime scene. But they only let the family identify the body, and they were able to recognize 16-year-old Shell, located not inside the car like the other victims, but underneath the car. The crime scene was set up as if, Shell had to pull off the side of the road because she had a flat tire. She jacked the car up, and while she was underneath the car to replace the tire, the car crushed her to death. So news started circulating with all these suspicious deaths that were surrounding Willie Maxwell. He spoke to the Alabama Journal, where the advertiser asked him about the suspicious death of Shirley, and then all the other 4 deaths surrounding him as well. And this is the quote he decided to give. I have prayed and thought about it a lot, and several thoughts have crossed my mind. He said, one thought was that not all deaths were accidental. It looked like there's some enemy or another sticking around to hinder me slipping around somewhere. I haven't seen him, but I'm asking the Lord to see, and he will see. And if I stick close to the Lord, I'll see it too. So the journalist ended up asking about his thoughts with the death of his first wife, and he said, I believe my first wife was honestly killed at the hands of somebody. I think that they were waiting for me. And when they saw my car, they thought it was me. But when they stopped her and found it wasn't me, they decided to take her instead. I believe if God was to speak to you or me, we would know who did this to her. Then the journalist asked about his brother, where he didn't think foul play was involved. He said, for my brother, I feel like he done it himself. No one held a gun to his head. He was a nice guy. He was even nice when he was drinking. Then the journalist asked about the thoughts on the death of his second wife, Dorcas. Here I feel like Maxwell kind of told on himself. Well, he'd been telling on himself this whole time, but he told the insurance company that he felt that Dorcas died from shock, but now he's saying that he felt Dorcas died from a car accident instead. And for the death of his nephew James, he said, well, someone could have drove the car into the ravine. And for the death of Shell, he's like, well, I can't really say because they didn't let me identify the body, so I'm not sure what could have happened. And then the journalist asked, So what do you think about these voodoo rumors? Another journalist asking about voodoo rumors similar to the Josephine story. And this is what Maxwell had to say. I've heard that. It's not anything true. I didn't want it said. They said the same thing about Christ, but I'm not as good as he is. Whatever that's supposed to mean. So just a couple days later, on June 18th, the funeral for Shirley was held. This funeral was held at Hutchinson Funeral Home. There was more than 600 attendees. So as the funeral came to an end, many people went up to the casket to get that final moment to see Shirley, to pay their respects. It was about 260 people still left inside the church. So now it was time for Shirley's sister to see her body. Shirley's sister went up to the casket and she realized that her sister just wasn't looking like herself. She began to cry. So as she's crying, she just happens to get a look at Willie Maxwell and sees that he just seems to be emotionless. And she shouted, "You killed my sister and you're going to pay for it." So filled with emotion, a man in a green suit decided to start bringing Shirley's sister away from the casket, away from Willie Maxwell. Then he shouted at Maxwell, "You're going to die." And he pulled out a 25 caliber pistol out of his pocket and shot 52-year-old Willie Maxwell 3 times in the face. So while doing my research for this part of the story, there were 2 different versions being told. One version, the one I just told, that after the funeral, people were still looking at we're still looking at Shirley inside of her casket. That's when her uncle, Shirley's uncle, shot Willie Maxwell 3 times in the face. And then other parts were telling me that it was during the eulogy that Maxwell was giving, which I believe that more because that was reported in a news article where he was giving the eulogy and the uncle shouted, "You're gonna die," and shot him 3 times in the face. Either way, Shirley's uncle got vengeance for her death, and I feel for all the other deaths as well. So immediately when that happened, Officer James, who is Robert's brother, Robert is the man in the green suit that shot Willie Maxwell, Shirley's uncle. His brother, Officer James, just so happened to be an officer. He asked him, "Why did you shoot him?" And he stated, "I had to do it, and if I had to do it over, I'd do it again." And then another officer was there, Officer Ware, who later reported that conversation that happened between the 2 brothers, but we'll get to that conversation later, why it wouldn't matter. Robert, green suit, was transported over to the police department where he was charged with 1st-degree murder and later pled not guilty by reason of insanity. And guess who represented Robert in court? Tom Randy, the go-to attorney that Willie Maxwell was using. Okay, so while the case is developing, the district attorney was asked to comment on Reverend Maxwell's death, and he stated, "This is a plain case of a murder in a funeral home, and that's the way I'm going to try it." And when he was asked about the voodoo rumors, he stated, "All that stuff is based on superstitions and reckless gossip. Maxwell was always a gentleman around me. He paid his debts, had excellent credit. Maybe that's why some people talked about him. That's a poor county, you know." So basically, he's making it seem like maybe someone was jealous of him and that's why they gossip about him. And there was a line of separation. The Black people tend to stay away from Maxwell because they know the deadly, horrible reputation that he has. But it seemed like the white people just found him to be just such a good old guy, a little bit of money in his pocket, well-spoken, well-dressed, just a good old fella. So that's why this district attorney is looking at him like, yep, the Black people got jealous. That's why they shot him. Black man can't have nothing without the poor folks getting jealous. So while trying to get information about Willie Maxwell, nobody in the neighborhood or in the county wanted to talk about him. Of course, he was popular for once being this captivating reverend, but eventually people realized he practices voodoo. He gets away with this stuff. He has people as sacrifices. He's scary. They even felt relieved that he was dead and looked at Robert, green suit, as a hero. Because they're like, you finally killed the killer, so we're good to go. We could be a little bit safer now and live a little bit more comfortable. And a lot of people felt that, yes, he may be gone, but we feel that his 5th murder was Shirley. That's why the uncle killed him. And they were later proven correct because during another autopsy, they realized that Shirley was dead before she was even placed underneath the car. So the car did not crush her because there was no damage to her ribs. So that's not possible. So she was already dead and then just placed underneath the car. Shirley's hands were clean, which means she couldn't have touched the car jack, tire, got down there, crawled underneath the car without her hands being dirty. There were no fingerprints anywhere around the car, so how did she even lift the car? I don't know where tires be, Well, how did she even get the spare tire without touching the car? Of course, while they're putting all of these pieces together, finally getting everything nice and clear, leading up to all these deaths being due to Willie Maxwell, of course, they can't make an arrest now because he's dead. So let's get to Willie Maxwell's funeral. There was over 400 people in attendance. Many people stated they attended just to make sure that Willie was actually dead, because they said knowing him, he probably faked his own death. I actually want to see him go into the ground, so I know he's gone for sure. Reverend C. Martis did the eulogy, telling the crowd that Maxwell had been granted eternal life and will be coming back to help people. He even alluded to Moses in his service, saying the biblical character was a murderer, but God used that murderer, saying that Maxwell made mistakes just like you, but the devil couldn't take Reverend Willie Maxwell from God. The satanic power that's covering this earth cannot take away this eternal life. Wipe your tears away, family. Wipe those tears away. And those of you who are gossiping, shut your mouth. And even after the service ended, he compared Maxwell to Jesus. All right, so Willie Maxwell is in the ground. Let's go back to Green Suit, the uncle of Shirley who killed Willie Maxwell, diving into his court case, but also giving a brief summary as well. So going back to the statement that he made before, saying I had to do it, and if I had to do it over, I'd do it again. That statement could not be used because technically he was not read his Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say or do will be used against you in the court of law. They did not say that. So he wasn't prefaced that anything he says or do would be used against him in the court of law. So that statement could not be used against him in the court of law. You guys know that he claimed insanity. They even had a psychiatrist testify, basically saying that she did believe it was insanity due to the moment, the emotions that was going on. So later he was found not guilty because of insanity, so he had to go get mental help, and the psychiatrist ended up later saying that she knew that he wasn't insane. Killing Willie Maxwell is probably the sanest thing that he could ever do, and he was looked at as a hero, and many of the jurors said if they were in that situation, they probably would have did the same thing. There was a man named Alfonso who stated that Willie Maxwell asked him to kill Shirley. He said no. He ended up offering him land, said no. Money, said no. Car, said no. All three said no. And so he testified, basically saying, yeah, he even asked me to do it just so the blood would be on his hands. Also, fun fact, in the courtroom, Harper Lee was there, the author of To Kill a Mockingbird, because she actually wanted to start writing. Well, she did start writing a book on this case and wanted to dive into the murders that he did, the voodoo behind. A lot of people didn't want to give her information. They wanted to be paid for it, but she refused to pay her source because she felt like that would be like bribing them to say what would sound good for the book. But she was in the courtroom, and that's one of her unfinished books that many people wonder how it would have turned out. For this story, I wish there was more detail on how he became a voodoo priest. I understand that a lot of people were scared to talk, but I guess during this time as well, voodoo was taboo. And I say voodoo because they describe it as voodoo in these stories. It could be root work, it could be hoodoo, it could be anything, but y'all know anything mystical, they be like, oh, you do that voodoo. So that's why I'm referring to it as that in the story. But I do believe the residents, just because I feel like a lot of times the voodoo accusations can be dismissed, like I said before, because it can't be proven in black and white. But I believe it because a lot of times when circumstances like this happen, where it seems like a person keeps ducking and dodging their karma, their consequences, and literally getting away with murder, I'm like, you're doing something on the end to cover your behind. And it always ends up with them facing their karma tenfold. He ended up getting shot in the face, the beautiful face that he was so hyped up for. But I wanted to share this story right after my Josephine Gray story due to the similarities in it. Why at the end of all of these videos my camera go blurry? Is it because the sun goes down? Maybe because the sun is going down. But you guys let me know what you think of this story down below. Like I always say, as above, so below, as within, so without, as the universe of the soul. Until next time, you guys, I'll